In this screencast, we want to take the work that we did in the previous two screencasts and bring those things together to display a list of contacts to our user. You'll recall that two screencasts ago, we set up our routing configuration. And as an example route, we created the /contacts route, which displayed the list template and used the list controller to display a page which will eventually show the users that list of contacts. Now, we didn't have a way to get contacts from the server, so in the previous screencast, we created our contacts resource, which talks to the REST API on our server and allows us to access the contact data. So in this screencast, we're going to fill in that list controller and the list template to make that displaying of data actually happen. Now, currently, we don't actually have any data, and we don't have a form yet that we can use to create a new contact, so we're going to have to go ahead and hard code some of that data in. You may recall from the previous screencast that we called our database data.json, which means this is going to be the file that it will look to for actually finding the data. So I'm going to go ahead and write some JSON in here. So this will be an array, and then why don't we just make two contacts here? We need to have an ID property. We also need a user ID. Then we're going to have the first name property, and each one of the properties of our contact records are going to be arrays, and they're going to have two values in them. The first one is the actual value. So for example, Jack. And the second one is going to be the type of the value. So for example, text. And the reason we do this is for validation purposes, because as you know, you can have many different input types in the browser. Traditionally, it's been just text input, but more recently with HTML5 input types, we can have numbers and dates and even colors and things like that. And so to take advantage of that feature, we have to give each field a type. And let's also have last name, and we'll set this to Rackham, and this will be text as well. There we go. So we have three values here, and hopefully by the end of this screencast, we'll be displaying these three users in the browser. So the next thing to do is open up the public/source/controllers.js file. Now previously we created this list controller, and now we need to go ahead and fill in some values. So the first thing we need to be able to do is to get those contacts from the server. To do this, we'll use the contact factory that we created last time. So we'll add that as a parameter here, and we'll replace this array, this empty array that we have right now is scoped contacts, and we'll replace this with contact.query. And this will go ahead and query the server and get all of the available contacts. Now remember, on the server side, we are making sure we only return the contacts of the user that is currently logged in. So we don't have to worry about filtering those at all here on the front end. We can just do contact.query. Now another thing we want to do in this table is choose which fields should be displayed. So we'll have scope.fields, and this is going to be an array. And right now we'll just put first name and last name. And later on, we'll look at how we can allow the users to choose exactly what fields they'd like to be displayed. But for now, we'll just show the first name and the last name. Now, another thing we want to allow our users to do is sort the table based on the different columns. So let's go ahead and add a scope.sort function. This function will take a field name, and it will go ahead and set scope.sort.field equal to whatever field is being passed in. And then we'll also do scope.sort.order, and this will just be exclamation part $scope.sort.order. And then down here, we will set scope.sort.field to a default of first name and scope.sort.order. Now, what exactly is this code doing? Well, first of all, we set scope.sort equal to this function, which will be called when the user clicks on any one of the headings in the table, and it will go ahead and resort the rows by that column. We're keeping track of what column is being sorted by adding a property to our function. And you can do this in JavaScript because a function is just another type of object. So we can add a property to it. And the property that we're adding is called field, and it will be whatever field they clicked on. We also change the order. Our sorting order will be done by a Boolean. False means to sort in descending order. Every time this sort function is called, it will swap this to the alternate Boolean. So the first time we click a field, this will switch to true, and the records will be sorted descending from Z to A. Now, believe it or not, this is everything that we need to do in the controller, and that's a good thing, because controllers in Angular should really be as thin and as light as possible. Really, their only job is to pass these different values into the scope that will be used to render the templates. Speaking of templates, let's go ahead and fix up our template. That's in public/views/list.html. And right now that is just a table. However, we're going to change that up a bit. First thing I want to do is add an input value above this. This will be an input value of type search, and this will allow us to filter through the table. So let's say we're searching for a specific person or some specific email address. We can go ahead and and type that into this search here, and our table rows will be filtered. We're going to give this the Bootstrap class of form control. We'll give it a placeholder value of a search, and we'll use the Angular directive ng model, and we'll set that model equal to query. Now you should know when we set ng model equal to query here, that means whatever is typed into this input box will be set to scope.query. Basically, if we wanted to have a default value there, we could do scope.query and we could set it to something in here. However, we want that to be empty by default, so we can just leave that off. And this value will be changed every time we type a character into this input box. Okay, so now let's create our table. So we'll start by creating a table head element, and in here we're going to have our initial table row, and inside of our table row we'll have a table header element, and the table header element will need to be repeated for each one of the fields that we want to show. So each one of the fields in our scope.fields array. So to do this, we will use the ng repeat directive, and we can say for each field in fields. And the first thing we'll do is inside this, we'll put the field name. When this table header is clicked, we want to run that sort function, right? So we have to wire up that event handle, and we do that by doing ng-click. This is another directive that will go ahead and call the sort function, and we want to pass it the field. And this field variable here is this field variable here. Oh, it looks like I accidentally put first instead of field. So this is going to be for each field in fields. We will create a new table header element, and we'll use that field variable in two places. First, we'll actually display it to the user here, but also when this table header element is clicked on, we will sort by that field. Now, when we sort by something, it would be helpful if we had a little arrow or chevron in this table header element to let the user know which direction it's currently being sorted. So we can do this with a span and use the Bootstrap glyph icons. We'll add a class here, and I'm going to paste this class name in because it's a little bit long. We need to have two class names here. The first one is a class of glyph icon, and the second one is a class for the specific icon we want. So glyph icon chevron down. I'm going to copy this and paste it below, and we're also going to have glyph icon chevron up. So the down chevron will be displayed when we're sorting down, the up chevron will be displayed when we're sorting up. But right now, both of those chevrons are being displayed. So what we need to do right now is add the ng-show directive. And the ng-show directive takes a JavaScript expression that should return a Boolean value, and if it's true, this element will be displayed, and if it's false, this element will be hidden. So what we want to do is say if sort.field triple equals the field, and remember that field references whichever field this is the table header element for. So if sort.field equals that field, then we know we're sorting by this field. And if not sort order, because remember sort order will be false if we're sorting down from A to Z. So we have to say not sort order. And if this expression here returns true, then we know that we are sorting down, and so we'll show the chevron down. Now I'm going to copy that and paste it in here, and all we need to change is take away the exclamation point, because we only want to show this if this is the field being sorted by, and this time we are sorting up if sort order is true. So that's all we need to do for our table head element, and we should actually be able to see this in practice already. So let's head over to localhost port 3000, and then let's head to port 3000/contacts. And as you can see, we can see our input element right here, which we can type into, but we don't have our table yet, and we do have an error. And the error here says we have an unknown provider, contact provider. And if you think about it for a second, this should actually make sense, because here in controller, we are looking for a contact factory, or at a lower level, a contact provider. However, that contact provider was in a new file, public/source/factories.js, but we never actually added that to our main.html file. So right here at the bottom, I'm going to copy our script to source/controllers, and I'm going to replace controllers there with factories. And now, if we come back to the browser, we refresh the page, you can see we have our table here, and currently there's only a table header. There's one little issue here. Notice the glyph icon is being displayed as a box instead of as the actual shape. And honestly, it took me a second to figure out exactly what was going wrong here, but I think the quick solution is to basically not just include the themed bootstrap that we have here, but we also need to include the standard bootstrap. So this is at lib/bootstrap/distribution return/css/bootstrap.min.css. And if you include that, and now we refresh the page, you can see we have our proper glyph icon showing up there. And the nice thing is, if we go ahead and click this, you can see it changes up and down. And if I click over here on last name, you can see now last name has the chevron going up and down. So that's a pretty good start to our template here. We successfully have done the table head. Now let's move on to the table body. So let's go ahead and create a T body element here. And in here, we want to create a table row. Now the table row, of course, is going to need to be repeated for every single one of our contacts. Now in controllers.js, our contacts are stored in an array called contacts. And so let's go ahead and say ng-repeat for every contact in contacts. But what we also want to do is use the pipe here, and we're going to tell Angular that we want to filter this by the query. Now this query here refers to the query in our current scope, which is the same model as the query that we have up here. So this is how we filter whatever contacts are being showed in our table. We only show contacts that match the query, which is by default nothing, or as we start typing, the list of contacts will be filtered to match this query. The other thing we need to do is pipe again and use another filter, the order by filter. And the order by filter allows us to do the actual sorting. So as our first parameter to order by, we'll pass sort.field, which is the field that we need to order by. And then we'll also pass sort.order, which will be false to sort descending and true to sort ascending. So that is our table row. But now in here, we will have our table data elements, right? And for table data elements, we need to use the same ng-repeat that we used above. So we'll say ng-repeat for each field in fields, because remember, whatever fields we displayed as the headers, we also want to display in the records. So in here, we will go ahead and display contact square bracket field, but remember that that is an array, and so we only want to display the 0th element of that array. Okay, so I'm going to save that and we'll come back to the browser now. And if we refresh the page, and there you go, you can see the data that we added to our database. So we're sorting by first name. I can go ahead and reverse sort. I can sort by the last name instead. If I go ahead and query, let's see, I can look for Jack. I can look for the last name Quinn, and I get Quinn. I can just look for the letter QE, and I get Queen and Quinn. Excellent. So we have querying and sorting working just fine. However, that's not quite all that we want to do here, because you might recall from the demo that we want to be able to click these different rows and go to individual pages. Now, unfortunately, there's no easy way to make an entire table row an anchor element. So what we need to do instead is listen for a click event on the table row with ng-click. And when a click happens, we want to call a function. So let's go ahead and write that function first. So what we want to do is add a function to scope that we'll call show. And this function will take the ID of an individual record, and we want to change the URL by going to the /contact/ whatever that ID is. Now, the way to do this is with the location provider. So we have to request this in our function, $location. And then down here, we can say $location.url equals contact/ID. So now back over here, we need to add this to our ng-click directive. So we'll say show, and we'll pass it contact.id, just like that. So now if we come back and refresh this page, we should be able to click Ellery Queen here. And when I click it, notice that our URL changes to contact/2. Of course, our template disappears because we're no longer on the /contacts page, but we don't have a route for this page, so nothing is displayed yet. If I go back, I can click on somebody else, and the same thing happens. There's one more thing I want to do, and that is notice the field names here, first name and last name. We're doing this in camel case, which is how these will be stored in the database. However, that's not quite as user-friendly as it could be to look at and read. So let's write an Angular filter that will change this to a more easy on the eyes format. We'll create a new file for this, public/source/filters.js. And as we've done in previous files, we'll go ahead and request the Angular module here. And then let's create a filter, and we will call this label case. And so what we have to do here is return a function. This function will take some input, which will be the name of a field, and it will return the label cased string. So let's set input equal to input.replace, and we'll use a regular expression where we search for any uppercase letter from A to Z, and we'll do a global search. And let me wrap that in parentheses because we want to capture that uppercase letter. And we're going to replace that with space $1. Now, if you're not familiar with JavaScript's replace function, we pass a regular expression as the first parameter here. Whatever text matches the regular expression will be replaced by our second parameter, a string. Now, I'm capturing that capital letter by putting parentheses around this A to Z portion, and that captured value will be available as $1. So basically, if we have first name, the portion that gets captured by the regular expression is the capital letter N, and that will get replaced by space $1, and $1 is the N, so this will be replaced with first space name. And this, of course, will work with much longer, so if we have the very first name, this will in turn become the very first name with spaces between each one of the words. Now, after we do that, the only thing left is to capitalize the very first letter, so we can return input.0, which is the first letter of the string, and we'll return that to uppercase, and then we can just do plus input.slice from 1 to the end of the string. So this will just capitalize the first letter and then concatenate that to everything except the first letter of the string. So that should work just fine. Let's not forget to add this file again. So we'll go to public main, and underneath factories here, we will add source/filters.js. And then here in our list.html, where we have field here, we'll go ahead and pipe this through label case. And that should be all that's required to properly format our table heading text. So if I refresh this, you can see that now we have first space name and last space name with each word being capitalized. Excellent. So now we are successfully displaying our list of contact records to the user. So now that we have a way to display our list of records, we're ready to build a way for our user to create records from within our application's interface. And that's what we'll look at in the next couple of screencasts.